Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'asuk b'divrei Torah. Barevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu pi b'chabeit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tze'etzenu v'tze'etzeim b'chabeit Yisrael v'lani yodea shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma Baruch atah Adonai l'mei Torah le'mo Yisrael.
Amen.
Amen.
I'm going to say it in English because sometimes people, including myself, don't know the Hebrew off by heart. Adonai, God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Adonai, our God, sweeten the words of your Torah in your mouth and in the mouth of your people, the family of Israel. May we and our offspring and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us, know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed art you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people Israel. Then the Hebrew of the next verse, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'chabanu mikol hamim v'natan lanu torato, Baruch atah Adonai notei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Blessed art you, Adonai, God, King of the universe, who selected us from all the peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed art you, Adonai, giver of his Torah. I just
Amen.
want to read now something in English because Hebrew is not my first language. So sometimes people don't understand what we're doing. Just quickly going to discuss one or two halachas as far as Hanukkah is concerned. So one of the halachas is doing, this is on Halachapedia. It's not by Rabbi Daniel Brody. The thing of it is I actually wanted to do one or two halachas on Hanukkah because we've been doing a lot of halachas on eating. And I think Hanukkah is a good time to do halachas on Hanukkah. Okay, so doing an activity before lighting Hanukkah candles. When the time comes to light, one must stop all activities and go and light. This obligation extends even to learning Torah, and of course to eating and other activities. So eating, when the time to light comes, a person may not eat a meal of more than a kibbutz of bread or mizanot before lighting, but less than the amount of bread or mizanot is allowed. So one may eat other foods such as fruits or drinks. Some are strict not to eat a half an hour before the time to light. For this law, cake has the same law as bread. In other words, anything that requires not the berena for short, but mizanot brocha, that would seem that you should wait till after. As far as learning Torah is concerned, when the time comes to light, in South Africa, it's about 7:21. You shouldn't learn Torah that would go into that particular time. However, if there's a chance that you'll stop learning early and go and light, and you may not make up that missed learning because you've got to go back to your wife and your children, many poskim write that it's better for one to continue learning rather than to stop to light candles. So the primary example is if you're learning with a chavrusa and shul, and that means your learning will stop. You should learn that obviously not to stretch the time too much, but to go home as soon as possible because you have to light on behalf of your family. But obviously, if you write in the middle of something and you're not going to be able to go back to shul and learn it with your chavrusa, you can. But just my advice for shalom bayit is if you keep the family waiting and they're starving, hungry, because you shouldn't eat before lighting the Hanukkah candles and you want to remain happily married, I'd suggest you keep the learning a little bit reasonable. Just some poskim allow one to learn Hilchut Hanukkah because one won't forget to light. In other words, if you're learning the subject matter of Hanukkah, it's less likely that you'll be distracted. A regular shur of Torah learning between Mincha and Mariv or after Mariv should continue on Hanukkah, even if it continues an hour after it's set. When they finish, they should announce that they should light candles. In other words, we generally don't get rid of a standard practice. What do you call it? Like a minhag in the way that you learn every day in order to do it. But obviously, most shuls have a respect that after Mariv, it should be at a conducive hour where people can daven and learn anyway. So what's interesting enough is the practice in Israel is that Avrechim, smicha students, people that are getting the rabbinical ordination, and people that are married that learn at a kollel leave their studies early to pray mincha. so an Arvit, and then light with their family. However, some hold that it's preferable to appoint one's wife to light at the proper time so as not to take away from the regular learning. If that's not possible, one should light after he finishes his regular schedule of learning. Nonetheless, if they've break and plan on returning to learn at candle lighting, then one can interrupt to light at the proper time. Same as obviously, it goes without saying that you shouldn't go to sleep a half an hour before the time of candle lighting, unless somebody can appoint somebody to wake you or you set an alarm, okay? And you should be stringent and avoid other activities even a half an hour before lighting begins, so that you don't almost get sucked into that other activity to where you can begin. So I think we've covered it. I think what I suggest you do, and what I tend to do, is that you put an alarm with a message on your phone. I'm not joking. Sometimes I'm that forgetful that unless I put an alarm on, because nobody's going to shore with coronavirus. Maybe you guys are. I'm not. So sometimes I have to put an alarm on my phone, or I have to literally keep a Hanukkah candle or that container right by my cell phone, so that when the alarm rings, I'm looking right at it. I'm serious. I'm not there. So otherwise, it's out of sight, out of mind. Okay.
So, Damon?
Yeah?
Is it similar? Just two quick things. So, so anything you eat that requires the bracha achrona on mezunot and dates and that, you shouldn't eat. That's it. And then, or not this, mainly.
On your question, it seems that Borena for short is fine.
That's okay, yeah.
Yeah. So
not the bracha achrona, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
And then,
yeah.
And is it similar? Just I'll be 30, not even 30 seconds.
No
So is it similar to the where one shouldn't do anything half an hour before eat? Is it similar to Badikat Chametz? Is there a similarity there?
I think that's an interesting point. I think probably it is a similarity in that both have an obligation immediately after nightfall. I think Badikat Chametz is even more stringent for two reasons. Just my reasoning, Kev, I might be wrong, is that to have chametz in your house and to possess chametz is a much more stringent spiritual penalty than whether or not you've lit the Hanukkah or the menorah on top. It's a heck of a lot more thing. You've got the sale of Barikat chametz, you've got the searching, you've got the declaration, you've got the burning, and you can't benefit from the chametz. So the implication is if you eat chametz during Pesach, there's kares. I mean, it's heckly more stringent than Hanukkah.
Yeah.
But I think the point is well taken, is that you have to be on time for these things. Okay, so speaking of time, we're going to start on the Gemara. Those are two good questions, I think Kevin asked. So I'm going to share my screen and just explain where we are and then go through a phase with you. All right, let me just see something. All right. I don't know if you can see my screen, guys.
Yeah.
All right. So this is from this is from Leviticus, chapter 15, verse 33. I'm just going to put it in context from reading from verse 31. Kevi, would you like to read it?
Yeah. Okay. You shall put the Israelites on guard against their uncleanness, lest they die through their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle which is among them. Such is the ritual concerning him who has a discharge, concerning him who has an emission of semen and becomes unclean thereby, and concerning her who is in menstrual infirmity, and concerning anyone, male or female, who has a discharge, and concerning a man who lies with an unclean woman.
Excellent, well read. So just a couple of things to bear in mind is that there's a term there, zot hazot. Okay, this particular term, I'm just going to share a different part of the screen, is this discussion that the Gemara has in Rabbi Meir, Okay, and I just want to share the Zoom screens to see if you can read it. Kevin's also good at reading Hebrew, so I'm going to get Kevin to read this one too.
Okay, 1 second. Let me just move this away. There we go. Miatai dehai v'zot lema'atei Zavah Meriot.
Yeah. So basically, this particular question this is the particular question in the Gemara which says, well, the actual first part of it is a question. It's basically stating the exclusionary adjective. Let me just give you an idea of what I'm saying here. Is that when I say and this, if I say to Arthur, listen, if Arthur says to me, he's getting ready for a meeting, and said, Damon, I want you to pick this up. What is it implying? If there's a whole lot of things on the table, I said, I want you to pick this up. What is it implying?
A specific object.
Correct. So it excludes everything else. It excludes everything else. So whenever the Hebrew Aramaic uses the term hazot, what it's implying is there are certain things that are going to be included in the category and certain things that are going to be excluded in the category. And this is the argument of the Gemara of what they wish to focus on at the moment. Okay, so how it ended last time is the rabbis were not happy with Rabbi Meir's Kal V'chomer. And basically, Rav Meir replied to them, surely it states, and this, the term and this, shall be his tumah when he discharges. And scripture has thus made the Zav dependent on the number of discharges and the Zavah on the number of days. Okay, so he was saying, listen, it's not a problem because when it contains the word zot, for the Zav, we derive 3 times and 3 discharges, and it doesn't mention anything about days at all. So basically, what we're saying is the minute the term zot is used for a Zav, it excludes the laws of days. So Rav Meir basically turns around and says, listen, this I can say this because the original proposition was as follows. Does anybody remember? Do you want me to repeat it? Can I ask you guys, what was the original proposition by Rabbi Meir? What was the Kal V'chomer, guys?
I can't think back. Sorry.
Okay.
Is it still concerning the Zav and the Zavah?
Yeah, but what exactly is the Kal V'chomer?
No. I saw something.
I think I know. So the Kal V'chomer is the fact that you're taking something that an animal did, and you're applying it to and you're using a human example.
Okay, so that is indeed a link between why we bring Zav and Zavah. That is the link, but what is the Kal V'chomer?
So the Kal V'chomer is that the fact that he's saying that it happens, that if it happens 3 times on the same day, it's more powerful than if it's 3 times over 3 days.
Excellent.
So he's proving that with Zavah that it's 3 times only. It's got nothing to do with days, whereby Zavah is 3 times over 3 days.
Excellent. So what Gavin's saying is, when the rabbis turn around and say, listen, you can't prove that, because if you use the example of the female Zav, the Zavah, it proves that it's the number of days. So what are we trying to establish here? What's the whole point of this Kal V'chomer? We're trying to establish what constitutes a habitual pattern. And you might say, well, why bring humans into it when you're talking about animals? Okay, what does the one thing have to do with another? So there's two aspects to consider. The one thing is that human beings, like animals, work on certain habitual principles. Okay, so let me give you an example. If you have a certain routine when you feed a cat or a dog, etc., and you put their food out at a certain time, every day, like clockwork, they will get used to a specific time of knowing when that is. I mean, I've got this snake with fur, this cat, that knows I get up every day at the same time. And what does she want? She doesn't want to see me. She wants her biscuit. So, like, I don't know if she's got a watch, but I don't understand it. But she's able to tell time to a T, and gets irritated when I sleep late on the Sunday or Shabbos because she hasn't had her biscuits yet. So that even animals are able to use certain clock times. Yeah. I don't even know how.
Damon, then maybe you should put a hot coal in that biscuit, then she won't come.
Maybe that's the case. But animals have got habitual behavior, and so do human beings. And halacha wants to derive, exactly as Gavin said, the habitual behavior. So it says, what constitutes habitual behavior? Is it the more frequently you do something over a longer period, or is it that if frequency includes a shorter period, it's much more intense, and therefore that is the determinant of an addiction or a particular habit? Does that make sense? So we can look at it in terms of without being crass. If you look at pornography, is that if somebody watches it more frequently over a period of time, does that create the habitual patterning? Or if one has to watch a lot of it at one particular time, and it seems more obsessive, or heroin or gambling, etc. So we want to say, is it intensity, according to Rav Meir, that actually is a strong indication of lack of control, lack of self-control? Or is it a case that habit is established over a longer period of time? And there are arguments for both sides of the coin. As Gavin rightly aptly said the other day, is that if an animal misbehaves and it all goes wrong on one day, it could be like a human being that's sleep deprived and worried about something, and he's not on his best on that day, and he's snappy at everybody. So that's not necessarily indicative of habit, as Gavin put a query forward. I thought that was a valid point. But on the other hand, when somebody shows a compulsion over a shorter period of time, it could indicate that there is less control and therefore addictive patterning. So the Kol V'chomer was as follows. It was saying, according to Rav Meir, if we establish that habit is caused over a longer period, surely if that occurs at shorter interviews, it's indicative of a bigger problem. Okay? And then the rabbis have a problem because how it's worded is as follows in 24a1. If where the bull spreads its 3 gorings over 3 days, its owner is liable to the full damages of MUAD. Then when it concentrated its gorings into 1 day, is it not certain that he's liable to full damages? In other words, the sages say to Rav Meir, let the law of Zavah demonstrate the fallacy of your Kol V'chomer. Because why? If she spread out her discharges of blood over 3 days, she's tamei. But if she concentrated her 3 discharges in 1 day, she is tahor, obviously observing 1 clean day of the mikveh. So Rav Meir has to respond to this. What it's just saying is, hang on, we can give you a case from the Torah that in fact, what establishes a pattern here of habit is the amount of days, meaning if it's spread out, as Gavin said, that establishes a pattern. So therefore, the sages are saying to Rabbi Meir, your Kol V'chomer of intensity doesn't work when we take the laws of the Zavah into account. Does that make sense? Rabbi Meir's response is as follows. In fact, it does work. It states, and this, Hazot, shall be his tumah when he discharges. And scripture has made the Zav dependent on the number of discharges, whereas on the Zavah, the number of days. So we're saying, listen, you can't use this as a proof because, okay, if you use the female Zavah, it's her discharges are counted over the number of days. As far as the male is concerned, it's on the frequency. So in other words, if he has 3 discharges over 3 days, fine, he is Tuma or Tameh. And if he has 3 discharges within 1 day, he's Tameh also. So it's about the number of times the pattern takes place. Does that make sense? Because how it starts off is this discussion was Rav Yehuda says an animal becomes muad over 3 separate days. Okay? And Rab Meir says an animal becomes muad over 3 separate times, meaning he doesn't make a distinction about the number of days that an animal has to do the activity. That's the basis of the argument. Arth, can you tell me what the basis of the argument is? I've put everybody on the spot today. You well enough that I can put you on the spot?
No, I'm struggling to grasp it.
All right, so can I try it one more time with
Yeah.
you? All right, because it's important that everybody follows. And Arthur had the same expression that I did at school, that I had that glazed look. Okay, so I'm gonna just, I'm just gonna show arm quickly, and then we are good. Just take them one second.
You did that glazed look for 5 years at school, so that's
yes,
habit,
I recognized it well.
Yeah, its practice is perfect.
Yeah, and that exactly, and that's why I never thought I'd be teaching. I always hated teaching.
So Arthur's betting to get out of the habit.
That's very funny. Yeah.
Like, Arthur's betting to get out of the habit from school still. Yeah. All right, sorry.
Speaking of habit, we're learning about habits here. So obviously we know how an animal became tam to muad.
Yeah.
Is that according to Rav Yehuda, we know if you do it on 3 separate occasions, we don't have any issue. Guys, let's just make something clear. To become from tam to muad, there's no issue. What's the issue is what happens to become from muad to tam. Does that make sense? So in other words, a muad is any animal that they've testified about which it is done on 3 separate days. So Rabbi Meir and Rav Yehuda don't argue about how something can become tam. I mean, how something can become muad. In other words, from tame to aggressively habitual and forewarned. It has to do it on 3 separate days because quite rightly, as Gavin said, you know, we give the person a chance to find out when his animal is becoming uncooperative and aggressive. But now we want to see how this entire daf is, how do you revert back to being tame from an aggressive state or a labeled aggressive animal? That's what we're learning here. So according to Rav Yehuda, what does it say?
It says the Mishnah now proceeds to explain the case of the Muad ox mentioned in the Mishnah of 15b. Which animal is a tam and which is a muad? A muad is any animal that there have been testified about what it has done on 3 separate days, and it reverts to being tam when it desists from this behavior on 3 separate days. These are the words of Rav Yehuda. Okay. Rav Meir says a muad is an animal that they have testified about what is done 3 times, what it has done 3 times, and it reverts to being tam any time that children poke it between the horns and it does not go.
Excellent. So we're going to stop there.
So
what we've established is Rav Yehuda has got a different opinion to Rav Meir. Rav Yehuda is saying that if it goes from tame to aggressive, habitually aggressive, it has to do it 3 separate days. How does it go back from being aggressive to tame? Exactly in the same way, 3 separate days. That's all I want you to know. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Meir's opinion is an animal must do it 3 times. Meaning, if it's 3 times, even in the same day, and it reverts to being tame, anytime that children poke at it and it doesn't go. In other words, just like he makes it a rather quick process for the animal to become MUAD, he makes it quite a quick process for it to go back to being tame. He's consistent.
Okay. Dams, it's the same as a parent. Like it might sound kind of strange, but often your kids pressurize you, and in the beginning you kind of snap, but after a while you learn to, how can I say, they can poke you and you don't respond in the same way. You respond in a positive way instead of a negative way.
That's a good point, actually. So it's interesting how parenthood helps with your growth.
Yeah.
Amazing. So, so all I want you to know, Arthur, is the basis for this argument is about habitual behavior. When something goes from being tame to wild and dangerous, and when something goes from wild to back being tame.
Okay,
so what's right?
The only question I have is why do they differ so much? Like, as in, one is 3 separate days, another one is 3 times in one day.
I suppose because if you're coming from 2 different points of view, like if you ask me how I would personally feel, I would say that you would need to establish habitual behavior over a longer period of time, because being red-headed, I know that if I don't have enough sleep and my blood sugar is low, I can be a very reactionary person. Whereas if I'm feeling well and I've had enough sleep, I'm generally okay. So if somebody had to take a snapshot of me on one day, I'd be locked up. If you take a snapshot over me over a year, I probably would stay out of jail. Okay. So I gravitate towards Rabbi Yehuda. But Rabbi Meir's got a point that maybe if a person's got a heroin or pornography addiction or anything like that, and you have this compulsion at a shorter period where it actually ruins your productivity, where you can't do anything else rather than focus on that particular addiction, then that's indicative of a big problem. In other words, there's a hell of a difference between somebody that's what you call a functional alcoholic. You do have people that drink at night, that they can have a drink or 2 at night, but they can hold down a job or run a business. But at night, after a drink or 2, they're just pretty useless to society. And they're probably not pleasant to be married with or being a parent. But there are a lot of people like this. They're called the Irish. They stay married. Occasionally the wife gets a black eye because he told her twice. And the kids scuttle and then become alcoholics themselves. But it seems to have not completely destroyed their society, because there's pub life in the evening. But the reason why there's not pub life in the morning is because you can't, if you're inebriated, you can't function properly. The problem is even by standards of the Irish, and if you know you're judging it by Irish standards, you're really holding it a low dragon.
Yeah.
Is that if you can't, just let me finish, if you can't control your alcohol consumption during the day, and you need those couple of drinks during the day, you should be at an AA meeting. Meaning there's a difference between, even on a lower level of what's socially permissible, like with the Irish or the English, and having what you call pub life pre-corona, versus being a dysfunctional alcoholic and not being able to get through the day without a few drinks. So Rabbi Meir's got a point as well, is that what's considered out of control behavior. I'm just giving you the 2 different points of view. What were you going to ask, God?
Why do they say that actually Irish women, in fact, all Irish women have blue eyes? It's because all the husbands have told them twice.
Oh, that's cute.
That's how it's supposed to go.
That's cute. So often, on a serious note, they've both got valid points of view of how a pattern is established. But the Gemara doesn't generally agree with Rabbi Meir for the reasons they brought a proof, and they said, look, if we look at the halachas of the Zavah, of what establishes habitual pattern of being in a state of impurity. It has to occur over a number of days. This is our proof, is that if she has discharges, but she has obviously over a day or even over 2 days, she's a minor Zavah. And
Okay.
then what she'll do is go to the mikvah. So after the 7 days of nida, there's 11 clean days. But if she has one particular discharge over a day or two, or a couple in one day, and then the second day, if it occurs on the 3rd day, she's a major Zavah and has to wait another 11 days. If after the 2nd day, she has one clean day, she then goes to the mikveh and is pure. So this is a proof. This is a proof very, very clearly that it is established a pattern over a number of days as opposed to the intensity of a number of intervals of a particular behavior. Does that make sense? So the Gemara is saying, hang on, when we're establishing pattern, we're going to give you the rules of Zavah to show that pattern occurs over a longer period of time. And this is an argument to Rav Meir's Kol V'Chomer. The Kol V'Chomer was as follows. If a pattern is established over a longer period, when it happens more intensely over a shorter period, does this not indicate a more out of control pattern? And the rabbis are saying not necessarily. If we bring the halachas of the Zavah, it's proving no, because what makes somebody Zavah Gedulah, where they have to wait for 11 clean days, is you need a period of time, no pun intended, to show habitual behavior. So they're arguing, and Rav Meir's retort, which is genius, is he's saying, listen, you saying the laws of Zavah, and I'm saying the laws of Zav, because the laws of the male Zav are dependent on discharges alone. So that's not an argument. That's what he's saying. You can't establish that pattern. And why are we using the term v'zot and zot? Is he's saying zot is an exclusionary term. Because what happens is that there's a special divine ordinance when it comes down to the female Zavah to allow her to be able to have healthy sexual relations with her husband, by saying in that case we make a special exception and work it over the number of days, because other than that, logic will tell you that the Kol V'Chomer is correct. What's he saying here? All right, let me just tell you what it means. Let me just see if I could give you a simple sort of answer. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So he's saying, Reb Meir says that his notion is indeed correct, because behavior repeated at shorter intervals is a stronger indication of pattern than behavior repeated at longer intervals. Therefore, the reason the Kol V'Chomer would indeed dictate that if a woman becomes a major Zavah through discharges on 3 consecutive days, then certainly she becomes a Zavah through 3 discharges in 1 or 2 days. Nevertheless, the special scriptural derivative, the zot, and this comes to instruct us not to apply the Kol V'Chomer in this case, but to restrict the conditions of the major Zavah to 3 days mentioned in her context. And it's precisely because reason would dictate otherwise that the Torah had to write and this to restrict the law of Zavah to the conditions stated in a passage. So on the contrary, the appearance of and this in the Torah indicates that the pattern is more readily established at shorter intervals than at longer ones. Otherwise, the Torah wouldn't have to write something that's obvious. The reason why it writes and this is to exclude the establishment of a major Zavah through discharges alone. So what Rav Meir is actually saying is the whole reason that the Torah wrote the term and v'zot is because logic would bring you to its Kol V'Chomer. And it was only because there's a special scripture rule to make a Zavah, a female Zav, dependent on the number of days, as a special law, that we would come to this understanding of the halacha, because logic would dictate otherwise. Otherwise, there'd be no need to mention that special scriptural word. So that's his proof that it's talking about the number of times at a more intense period. Does everybody understand that argument? Can you repeat it to me? Guys,
Yeah.
repeat the argument to me.
Okay, so well, it's the same thing. It's Rabbi. He's saying that because of the word zot,
Okay.
it's referring, it's specifically referring to the 3 times, the frequency.
Okay, so what are you saying?
As opposed to, so the intensity. His proof is that it's the intensity, and zot. I can't remember. You said something about zot being the exclusion. Just say it again. Sorry, I actually forgot that
there's
part.
just 1 minute left. Basically, Reb Meir says that without the scriptural special wording, hazot, and this, we would come,
I've got it.
without that special word, we would come to the conclusion that his Kol V'chomer is right. It's only because it excluded discharges alone and was including days in the Zavah that we come to realize that it's over a longer period of time. But the natural logic would tell us that shorter intervals indicates a problem. And it's the special scriptural ordinance is actually proving his case. It's not disproving his case.
So can I just repeat that? So that's scripture, because so you said it quite quickly the first time. You did repeat it now. So the scriptural sources say that the discharge of a Zavah has to be over 3 days. It can't be 3 times based on intensity, correct?
Yeah, so he's saying logic.
So that's his argument.
Yeah, no. He's saying the reason it's mentioned scripturally is we wouldn't have come to that conclusion